Joining Community today, we have Dr. Laura Lowery. She is an associate professor at Boston University in the Department of Medicine. Professor Lowery discovered her love for academia and biomedical research as an undergrad at the University of California, San Diego. In 2008, Professor Lowery received her PhD from MIT, working at the Whitehead Institute. During her postdoctoral research in the Department of Cell Biology at Harvard Medical School, she became fascinated with the inner workings of neuronal growth cone and axon guidance. Currently, Professor Lowery leads a comprehensive, multifaceted research program to further the understanding of cell biology defects that underlie neurodevelopmental disorders, various developmental disorders affecting other organ systems, as well as cancer metastasis. In addition to her research interests, Professor Lowery is actively involved in service related to promoting anti-racism in the Boston University community. She is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Hematology and Medical Oncology section, Chair of the Section of Anti-Racism Steering Committee, the Hematology and Medical Oncology representative to the Racial Equity Champions Committee for Boston University's medical group, and a trained facilitator for the Lift Microaggression Bystander Training Workshop. Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor Lowery. Could you please start by expanding on your educational and professional journey that's led you to where you are now?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this invitation. Okay, so you want to know more about my educational professional journey? Okay, so I started as an undergrad, and I'm not sure how much you want of this, but I will I will give you like the big overview, and you can ask more questions if you have any. So I started as an undergrad at University of California, San Diego, and actually I was very interested. I was a biology major, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I was really interested in getting involved in residence life leadership opportunities and just supporting the communities that I was a part of. But then by the end of it, I realized I needed to do something related to my future career. And I did an integrated bachelor's master's program in biology. And so I started doing research there for the first time. And I also started being a teaching assistant for various classes. And I realized I just loved the process of learning and inquiry and discovery. And I realized at that point that perhaps one of the most powerful ways for me to have an impact in a transformative time of people's lives is to become a professor. So that's when I had this idea to pursue that path, although I didn't know if I could do it back then. And so I applied for graduate schools, and I moved all the way across the country to MIT to go to graduate school there. And I definitely thrived in doing research at the time. And then I decided I did want to continue the path. I did postdoctoral research at Harvard, and then I became a faculty member first at Boston College for a number of years, and then I moved to Boston University in 2020.
Is that where you are right now?
It is.
Okay. Could you share what you do at your current position a little bit more, expand on what it is to be a professor at a university?
So there's so many different possible paths to be a professor at a university. For example, when I was a professor at Boston College, I did about 50% teaching, maybe 50% research, 30% teaching, and then 20% service. Whereas now at Boston University, I'm 80% research and service, and then 20% in my role of I'm the Associate Chief for Faculty Affairs, which encompasses being the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and doing helping faculty with promotion and tenure process, and the like mentoring aspect, and then supporting the anti-racism committee as well. So about 80% research, 20% service, although really sometimes the service takes more because it's something that is very rewarding for me to spend more time on.
So, what initially had got you interested in service?
That's a great question. So I have always felt that one of my major life focuses is to support others around me in my community to become their best selves. And I want to show people that they are seen and heard and validated so that they can really thrive. And motivating people has been one of my strengths. And there's so many opportunities for that. in service. And the fact is, we live in a rather stressful society where there's always more things to do than we have time for. And especially, at a medical center, I support the cancer center clinic. Um, People are always just very focused on their individual stressors. And it's easy to forget the humanity in people around you. And so one of the reasons that I have become more involved in service is to help people take a step back and see their bigger picture and support them, so that they can bring their best selves to work.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that insight. And I guess going back to when you were like interested in your STEM career, what was the time where you sort of knew that, yeah, I liked biology, I like science, and also when did you realize that service is a really important part of who you are and what you wanted to do?
Okay, so there's a lot there. So when I was in college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I actually was trying to decide whether to be a biologist, a psychologist, or a rabbi. You know, I know they sound very disparate, but at the end of the day, I wanted to be able to um, investigate, explore, understand why people are the way that they are
Mhm.
at some level. Like, why is the world the way that it is? And there's different different avenues to explore that question. And I was good at biology, and I enjoyed it. And actually, when I was in college, I briefly changed majors to human development and planned to be a psychologist. And I minored in Judaic studies because I thought maybe I'd do that. But at the end of the day, I kept coming back to biology as, again, just a powerful platform where I could thrive. And there's many opportunities to have a positive impact in the world, in this. And again, it was about what resonated with me.
Mhm.
And given the various opportunities I had, I started just really enjoying teaching and supporting others, and realized that this was a good conduit for me to do that. So that answered one question. But again, I want to point out, like, I didn't know if I could be successful in this path. And I think this might get to some of the questions you might have for me later. Is I think one of the most important tips for young people, and really anyone, but is trying to figure out what they want to do, they need to realize that the people that are successful in whatever path they're taking are not successful because they're necessarily the most competent or the most intelligent, or the brightest or most talented. They're the ones that don't let their fears and insecurities stop them from moving forward. Like, we all have so many fears and stressors and insecurities and doubts. And the ones that just keep moving forward despite those are the ones that are successful. And I always encourage, especially young women, because in our society, it's so easy for women to doubt themselves.
Right.
There's this quote, in our society, men are assumed competent until proven otherwise, and women
Mhm.
are assumed incompetent until proven otherwise. And women have often really internalized that without realizing it.
Right.
And I've seen that over and over again in my career. So women have to just keep leaning into the discomfort and speak up and take steps forward and take initiative, even though there's so many reasons in our heads to have doubts.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's definitely something that I like to explore during my interviews in terms of, um, what challenges that you may have had as a woman in STEM. And a big one is either feeling undermined for the work that you're doing and sort of having to prove yourself in the space that you're in. So, is that something that you've experienced throughout your STEM career?
I would say I've seen many examples over the years. And in
Mm.
fact, what's been surprising is that at least for me originally, when I was in college, I didn't notice any sort of discrimination based on being a woman. Like, I was completely unaware of it. It wasn't until you continue going up the ranks that
Mm.
it gets more and more prevalent. And yes, so it's definitely there. And it's something, again, that we just need to continue acknowledging and, taking steps to keep moving forward and despite the experiences that, women have. Like, I remember when I was in grad school, my advisor was a woman, who she had 4 daughters, and she told me, and she was a woman in a generation where, um, you had to be very tough. And so she told me, she said, Laura, if you want to be taken seriously as a scientist, you need to look serious. You can't smile, you can't wear makeup, you can't wear feminine clothes. You just need to act like a man. And, I don't think that is necessarily the right way either. I think it's important to embrace, um, all of who we are, and express that in the world. And even that can still be seen as successful and powerful. But yes, I have experienced discrimination because I'm a woman over the years. True.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to point out something you said sort of at the end, where I think it was that masculinity is sort of equated with professionalism. Is that correct? Um, is that some, could you expand more on that and sort of the idea that, that isn't true, but is that something you've come back to when you were in your STEM career and sort of wanted to establish a place for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that it's kind of embedded in our culture. The differences, I mean, there are differences in masculine and feminine energies, and I don't think our society does a very good job of appreciating, respecting both, and how they're both important. And it has a negative impact in many careers.
Mhm.
So when I was a junior faculty member, I went to a conference. It was just 150 like top scientists in our field, and it was run by male organizers, and they were very vocal about how great it was that they made sure that we were almost 50% women in this conference, and it was all faculty almost, and so that was great. But then I noticed that there was a lot of discussion periods, and it was always the men that were speaking up, and women rarely spoke up. And so I actually started keeping track of it, and I noticed that, out of 10 questions or comments, 9 of them were from men. And so then, later on, we were hanging out getting drinks later at the end of the conference. And again, this one man was saying, oh, it's so great that, we're 50-50, there's really equality now in the sciences. And I'm like, yeah, but even though, we're equally represented, 90% of the comments and questions are from men.
Right.
And the guy looked at me and he said, well, that can't be true. I'm like, no, no, it is true. He's like, no, no, you're wrong. You're not, you're showing your own bias by not realizing that women are speaking. And I said, no, I've been keeping track. Like, I was writing it down. And he looked at me and he said, well, maybe that's your problem then. Maybe you should be more focused on thinking about science and less focused on who's speaking up. And, I thought it was really ridiculous and short-sighted. And I mean, this is a nice guy. He just was in this moment of bias himself. And I think that the only way we're going to make change is if we do acknowledge the differences and then encourage women. Again, this is a situation where I noticed men were very easily, they had no problem just saying random harebrained ideas, that we have speculations and some, proposing some out there ideas because they weren't afraid that their crazy ideas might be taken as incompetence. But the women in the group, like, they only wanted to say something if they knew it was this great idea, right?
Right.
And so this was just one of many examples, but we really need to just encourage young women and support them to speak up. So when I train, I mentor a lot of women, and one of my rules is when we go to conferences and seminars, like, everyone has to ask questions. We have to invoke our fight or flight response so that we desensitize ourselves to it, so that we can realize that you know when we are in these, so many of us have social anxiety or public speaking anxiety, and then we just really have to push past that and
Mhm.
not let that stop us. And the more we do it, the easier it will get.
Thank you so much for sharing those anecdotes and that experience. I guess moving into, what do you think that institutions and organizations and even like smaller events can do to create a more inclusive environment for women? Not just, equal representation, because that doesn't really translate into inclusion.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it's an exact question that I was part of a women's dinner group a couple months ago where we were talking about that same issue, is how can we better support women in academia?
Mhm.
One of the things we were talking about is the concept of non-promotable tasks. So there's a lot of things in the workplace, in any workplace, that women will naturally, do, like, organize the lunches or the birthdays or or more mentoring or more, supporting others. And, they take on the lion's share of these tasks that are critical for the functioning of the community, but they're not promotable.
Mhm.
And so, we've been talking about how can we either more equally distribute those sorts of tasks to everyone, or better appreciate and acknowledge those particular tasks for what they are, essential for the functioning of the organization. And so, I really think it's a matter of um, better education and support for everyone, and more conversations. So in my section of hematology and oncology at the Department of Medicine, we organize 4 sessions for faculty every year on various topics in diversity, equity, inclusion, in the hopes that more we can really, and we're a clinical department. We cancer center, we do a lot of, it's really either serious cancer work or basic science, but we take time out of our schedule. And on the one hand, you're like, is 4 sessions a year really enough? Well, it's more than a lot of people are doing. And so we need to continue engaging in conversations, to have an easier time learning about each other in our different ideas and our different strengths and weaknesses, and how we can support each other as a community. Really, I think conversation in a safe environment, where we're okay with talking about the uncomfortable topics, um, is one way forward.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to go back to something you had said earlier, sort of about being a mentor. And when you take women out to these conferences, you encourage them to ask questions, speak, and be sort of more visible in those conferences and get rid of the sort of expectation that what you say and what you need to present needs to be like close to perfect and that sort of double standard. I guess I want to move into, has mentorship and support networks played a role in your STEM career? And if you could just elaborate on that.
Yeah, this is a great question. And in fact, it's so relevant right now. I just organized a session yesterday, at BU on mentorship. And this particular one is about interracial trust and mentoring. But mentorship is so critical. For me, it's played a very important role. My graduate advisor, she was a very, despite the fact that I didn't always agree with some of her suggestions, she was a very strong mentor, and I knew she was there supporting me. And in fact, I had a kid in grad school, a baby in grad school, and at first there was a period where I'm like, you know what, things were difficult, and I'm like, I'm just going to take a leave of absence right now. And she said, absolutely not. You are not taking a leave. I will keep paying you, even though you're not productive right now. Like, just, ride this out, and I will support you while you do that. And thank God for that, because it did enable me to then, once the difficult times were behind me, I was so grateful that she didn't let me get off track. So she was an incredible mentor. I also was very proactive about seeking mentors. Like, so when I was at postdoc at Harvard, I had my postdoc mentor who was my direct boss, but then I also made sure to seek out many other um, experts in the community, because being in Boston, there's so many, and I would meet them and interact with them at conferences, and then ask to meet with them separately. And it gave me an opportunity to really get a wide range of mentoring. And I think that's one of the issues I see with current young people, is they're afraid to ask for mentoring. They're afraid to be proactive and take initiative to do that. And in fact, I'm now instituting we have medical fellows in our section, and we've noticed over the years that they're less and less inclined to seek that out themselves. And so now we are really trying to develop a better mentorship program for them, that's more transparent and formalized, because yeah, people absolutely need mentoring. In fact, success in many fields, including academia, is all about who you know.
Mhm.
And the more mentoring you have, more people you know, the more people are going to be sponsoring you for grants and awards, and it really has a trickle down effect of you want to know as many people as possible.
Um, so you mentioned that people, or at least younger folk right now, are sort of afraid of seeking out mentors. Do you know possibly why that is? Could you expand more on that?
That's a great question of why young people these days are not as proactive about seeking mentorship. I would say that in general, there has been a shift over the years. I've seen it myself over the last 15 years that I've been in academia, where students in general are more hesitant, more stressed. Um, I think there is a mental health epidemic. Um, I'm not sure how much it has to do with the prevalence of the internet and iPhones and people's there is research that shows that all the screen time does affect your brain. There's information, it's so easy to get now. Like you can just pick up your phone and look up anything under the sun, that it almost people lose motivation for the need to really like push themselves. Like
Mhm.
when I was your age, I couldn't find out any information I wanted. Like we didn't have these. And seeking out information was something you really had to push yourself to do. And you had to have more perseverance and determination. And I think that our society has done a disservice to the current generation where they just don't learn the skills of resilience and perseverance and being proactive that were necessary in the past. And I hope that there will be a shift in the future. But right now, I think that there has been a challenge for young people, and I see this in my own kids. I have a almost 18-year-old and a 14-year-old. Um, Information is just too accessible, and actually, that seems to be causing problems because they then lose the motivation to seek out new information the way that we used to. I mean, this is just speculation here.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing what you think would be the answer to that question. I did not mean to put you on the spot by any means by asking that. I was just interested. I guess moving back more to diversity and inclusion and equity in the STEM field. A big part of STEMmunity's goal is to increase visibility of women in STEM, and hopefully that platform can inspire younger generations. I guess I just wanted to know your general thoughts and opinions of representation in women in STEM, and overall, how does diversity and inclusion impact STEM innovation?
Well, I mean, research shows that the more, diversity there is, the more innovation there is as well. Okay. I was at a leadership workshop last year, and they were talking about how for groups of people and that are tasked with doing particular problem solving,
Mm.
that you actually want a group of people that they don't all get along as well. You'd think like, oh, when I'm in a team, I want to be with people that I get along with. But actually getting along with everyone, having group mindset, having everyone thinks the same. Um, Science has shown, or the research has shown, that they're unable to come up with the big breakthroughs and innovations, that a team that has some conflicting ideas and there's some friction, like everything is created from friction. And so, the more diversity of opinions there are and experiences, the richer the outcomes will be. And so clearly, like diversity is critical. In terms of women, it's funny because like at the university level, there are actually more women than men. It's just as you continue up the path of, these traditional hierarchical success paths, women are not represented. So for example, in my section, there's something like 55 faculty. Um, I think 70% of us are women, but there's multiple levels. There's instructor, assistant professor, associate professor, full professor. I think our section has only a single one full professor woman. Yeah, out of 55 faculty, there is one full professor woman. There is a handful of us associate professor women, and most of the women are at the lower levels, and so clearly we need to make a if we value having diversity at all levels, we need to do a better job. And it's not just women; it's also people of color as well,
Mhm.
and people of all different backgrounds and experiences. We want to include them all at various levels.
Yes, you're here and you're sharing your story, and that's definitely helping in finding some person's sort of trajectory in their STEM career and inspiring them. How do you think storytelling and sharing personal experiences can inspire future generations and specifically young women who are looking into their STEM career?
Well, I think storytelling is critical. At the end of the day, we're all human beings that just want to be seen and heard and understood. And no matter what it is that we're doing in life, like we just want to be seen and heard. And and we want to feel connected to something greater than ourselves. And we want to, have connections with others. And storytelling and sharing personal narratives, um, that is a very um, important, powerful way to connect with others. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of people being vulnerable and sharing their experiences to connect with others.
Moving on to our next question, what's some advice that you would give your younger self, looking back at your STEM trajectory and where you are right now?
Advice that I would give my younger self. Hmm, that's a good question. So, one uh, lesson that I am still trying to integrate in my life on a regular basis is that to remind myself that it is okay to make mistakes and I don't need to be perfect. This is, I'm 45 years old and I'm still regularly working on this. It's amazing how so many of us think that we're okay with that, but then when situations arise, we're really not. So many of us, like overachievers, want to be seen as perfect and good and infallible, even though we know that like everyone makes mistakes, and we always well, many of us give other people more grace than we give ourselves. And so I would remind my younger self or tell my younger self to just that idea that we are all worthy, important, like successful, loving people in this world that are supporting others and ourselves, and we don't need to be perfect. So there's that. And then also the reminder that life does not turn out the way that you think it will. We have these meandering paths, and so yeah, there isn't just one way of being in this world. And also that's another thing. Like so many of us are focused on doing all the time and not just being. And so it's important to focus on our own emotional and mental well-being, and not just how much we do. Actually, so I don't know if you've heard of Brene Brown, but she is a very powerful social science researcher that has published a number of books and stories about what it takes to be like. She's done research on people who are wholehearted. That's the word she gives them. People who feel as though they're doing well in this world. And one of the key aspects, I think there's like 10 attributes to be wholehearted, and one of them is to let go of the need of seeing productivity as self-worth. And I know that has been a main driver in my life, is like, the more productive I am, the more worthy I am. And that is just not something that is healthy and sustainable over time. But I definitely encourage you to look up Brene Brown's like 10 guideposts for being wholehearted, because there's some good stuff there.
And ending off with, what guidance would you give to the young girls or just anyone watching this interview and looking at their STEM career? I know you gave some great advice to your younger self. Would you repeat that for those watching, or do you have anything else to say?
Mhm. Yeah, so again, I'm going to repeat what I had said earlier, that in terms of, what young people need, is to remember that they should not let their fears and insecurities and doubts stop them from striving to achieve their dreams. We are often our own worst enemies. We're the ones that get in our own way. And, that is, we have to, we have to get rid of that. And just like, I tell my kid, he'll often say, "Oh, he's afraid." And I don't say, "Don't be afraid." I
Hmm.
say, because that's not validating. Instead, I'm like, "That's okay. You're allowed to be afraid. You're also brave. Push yourself and do it anyway." Fear is not. We shouldn't be afraid of fear. We should just say, "Okay, this is how we're feeling in this moment, and we just have to keep pushing forward." So I would say that's probably one of my biggest tips for young people, is to not let that fear stop them, and to be proactive, really, to take initiative, to speak up and reach out and connect with others.
Thank you for sharing that, especially about sort of accepting fear as an inherent emotion or feeling that can happen, and sort of recognizing the intelligence and who you are as a human, and knowing that you can overcome that if you push through it. It was such an honor and pleasure sharing this interview and talking with you, Professor Lowery. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your anecdotes and sharing your raw experiences. That means a lot. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.